Okay. Hey. Hey, it's Professor Moon here. I'm back at my home in Richmond, in my apartment. I hope that y'all are doing well. Uh, all right, I'm going to jump right into chapter, let's see, 5. Okay. Now, if you recall, we're going through Rhoda's book, and he has two premises and a conclusion to his argument. First premise says if Christianity is at least 50% likely to be true, then it's rational to commit to living a Christian life. That's what he's been focusing chapters 1 through 4 on. Okay, and that's what we've been discussing with decision theory and so on. The second premise is that Christianity is at least 50% likely to be true. Okay, he needs this to respond to the many gods objection. So it has to be that Christianity is more likely than its other contenders, for example. All right, so how is he going to argue for that? Well, he's going to argue first that God exists. Okay. Second, he's going to argue that Christianity in particular is true, and he's going to argue for that in a couple ways. One way is by way of a historical argument for the resurrection of Jesus. So that's a few chapters later, and we might not end up covering all that since some of it's not philosophy in particular. It's a little more an argument from history. First of all, let's focus then on his argument for God's existence. And the argument he's going to use is called the Cosmological Argument. Cosmological Argument. Okay, so here's my board. Cosmological Argument. And the joke here to help you remember is the cosmological argument is about what caused the universe. Okay, cosmological argument. What caused or what is the explanation of everything that exists. The cosmological argument is one of the most famous arguments for God's existence, which is one of the reasons why I like this book is because Rhoda does a pretty nice treatment of the argument, and it's for us to be able to discuss. It might go, I think it goes back to Aristotle at least, and it goes through the Middle Ages, the Islamic philosophers, like Al-Ghazali found Aristotle's work and developed it. And then from there, Aquinas learned from the Islamic philosophers. And then you get Aquinas and Maimonides and others, Moses Maimonides. And then through to the early modern philosophers like Leibniz. And even now today, people are still talking about the cosmological argument. Okay, so it's a famous argument. Has a lot of history. It's less recent than, let's say, the divine hiddenness argument, which we know is more of a recent argument. Okay, so how does the cosmological argument work? To understand it, you need to understand the idea of modality. Modality, and this is going to be on the handout. Modality. Now, you should get out the handout. It should say Taking Pascal's Wager, Chapter 5. Modality is about things like possibility, contingency, necessity. Some of you might have learned about these in your other classes. I'm going to be going over it today. If you're already familiar, this might be a good refresher. And the content we're going over is basically pages 85 to 87. Okay, so pretty simple. Now, we can just start filling in the handout. Okay, so the first blank is going to say this. P is possibly, the blank is possibly. P is possibly true. Okay. Equals, or equal is the same as definition, which is the same as if and only if for some of you in other classes. P is possibly true if and only if it could have been the case that P is true. For example, take the proposition that pigs fly. Now that's false. Pigs don't fly, but could the world have turned out differently so that pigs did fly? Or could it ever be the case that pigs will fly someday? Yeah, it's possible. I mean, evolution might have gone a little differently, or maybe scientists might invent something to add on to a pig so that they can flap wings. So we can imagine that it's possible that pigs could fly. It didn't have to be the case that pigs couldn't fly. All right, so that's possibility, and that's a possible truth that pigs fly. Okay, next, P is contingently true. Is contingently true. Yeah, that's another word. Contingently. Okay, P is contingently true. Is to say, there you go, there's our contingently, that P is true and possibly false. Meaning P is true, but it didn't have to be the case. It could have been false. So one of those is Professor Moon exists, but if the world could have turned out differently, right, where my parents never met, or maybe I had died early as a young child. So a proposition like Professor Moon exists is only a contingent truth. Same for Donald Trump is the president. Okay, that's true, and it's contingent, but it's contingently true. It could have been false. We can imagine a world where Hillary won instead, or maybe Trump had fallen ill and never made it to presidency. So that's a contingent truth. And that lastly, P is necessarily true. Necessarily. Okay, so we got necessarily there at the bottom. For P to be necessarily true is for it to be true and it's impossible, not possible that P be false. So an example like this, typical examples are like mathematical truths, like 1 + 1 = 2. It could have never been the case, unlike my existence of Donald Trump being president, it could have never been the case that 1 + 1 = 3 or that 1 + 1 not equal 2. There's also logical truths, like for any object, every object is identical to itself. But that couldn't have ever been false, right? So so these are necessary truths. Okay, so now that we have those concepts in mind, and we could say these concepts are modal concepts. These are concepts about modality. Now one more idea to get is these are all types of truth: possible truth, contingent truth, necessary truth. We can also understand falsehoods. Something could be possibly false, contingently false, meaning it's false but it could have been true, right? Something necessarily false is really just to say it's impossible that it be true, right? So you can understand these sorts of modal falsehoods in terms of modal truths. Okay, the last two concepts to get, and he goes over these on page 87, is the idea of a contingent being and a necessary being. So I already wrote versions of that down. So S is a contingent being equals S exists, but it is possible that S not exist. So an example I already gave was me. I'm a contingent being. This water bottle is a contingent being. And this, so on. So the next is the idea of a necessary being, which is something that exists, but it's impossible that it not exist. Okay. Now, are there necessary beings? Is there such a thing? Some people think that if there are numbers, like the number 2, that the number 2 couldn't have not existed. That's a necessary being. Again, it's debatable whether numbers exist, but that would be an example of that. Okay, so that's my way of covering what's in the reading. He gives a few more examples of necessary truths and contingent truths, some of which aren't just mathematical, like Sarah is taller than herself. That's necessarily false, right? It couldn't never be true that somebody be taller than themselves. Okay, so that's the introduction to modality and the cosmological argument. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.